The golden cage, the morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Harper residence, casting geometric shadows across the polished concrete floors. Maya Harper stood in the kitchen of their modern craftsman home in Portland's Pearl District, watching the coffee machine gurgle to life. Everything about their house screamed success. The custom cabinetry her husband had designed, the imported Italian marble countertops, the curated art collection lining the walls. It was a showpiece, featured in Architectural Digest just last year, but lately it felt more like a museum than a home. Daniel Harper was already dressed for work, adjusting his tie in the hallway mirror. At 42, he was in his prime, the principal architect at Harper & Associates, with a portfolio of award-winning commercial buildings throughout the Pacific Northwest. His dark hair was touched with distinguished gray at the temples, and he carried himself with the confidence of a man who had conquered his field. "Late meeting tonight," he announced without looking at her. "The Seattle Convention Center project needs final revisions." Maya nodded, wrapping her hands around her coffee mug. She was 38, a former interior designer who had given up her career 8 years ago when Daniel's firm took off. He'd convinced her they didn't need two demanding careers, that she could focus on their home, on starting a family. The family that never came despite years of trying. "That's the third late meeting this week," she said softly. Daniel finally turned to face her, his expression impatient. "Maya, we've discussed this. The Seattle project is massive. It's a $15 million contract. Do you know what that means for the firm?" "I know what it means," she replied. "I just miss having dinner together." He crossed the space between them, kissing her forehead in that perfunctory way that had replaced real affection years ago. "Once this project is locked down, things will settle. I promise, promises." Daniel was excellent at making them, less consistent at keeping them. Maya watched him grab his leather messenger bag and head for the door, his expensive cologne lingering in the air after he left. She noticed he'd been wearing that cologne more frequently lately. A different brand than his usual, spicier, more youthful. The house fell silent except for the distant hum of traffic. Maya carried her coffee to the living room, where her laptop sat on the glass coffee table. She'd been researching online courses in interior design, thinking about restarting her career. But something else caught her attention this morning. A notification on their shared credit card account. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the statement. There, among the usual business expenses and grocery purchases, were charges that made her stomach drop. Dinner for two at Kennard, Portland's most romantic restaurant, on a night Daniel had claimed to be working late. A purchase from Tiffany & Co. For $1,200, she'd received no gift. Hotel charges at the Kimpton Vintage Plaza dated barely 2 weeks ago. Maya sat back, her mind racing through the past 6 months. The late meetings. The weekend conferences that seemed to multiply. The way Daniel had grown distant, irritable when she asked about his day. The mysterious texts that made him smile in that private way. The way he used to smile at her. She thought about Vanessa Reed, the young architect Daniel had hired last year. Fresh out of graduate school, ambitious with long auburn hair and an infectious energy. Daniel had praised her constantly at firm dinners, talked about her innovative designs, mentioned how she understood his vision better than anyone. Maya opened her laptop and logged into Daniel's email. He'd never changed the password they'd once shared, probably didn't think she'd ever look. Her heart pounded as she scrolled through his inbox, searching for Vanessa's name. There it was, not in his main inbox, but in a folder labeled Seattle Project. Dozens of emails between Daniel and Vanessa, but they weren't about architecture. They were about meetings at hotels, about how much they missed each other, about plans for their future together. One email made Maya's blood run cold. It was from Vanessa, sent just 3 days ago. "I can't keep being your secret, Daniel. Either you tell Maya about us by the end of the month, or I will. I love you, but I'm not going to hide anymore." Daniel's response was clinical, calculated. "Give me time. The divorce has to be strategic. Maya's uncle has connections, and I can't risk him interfering with our business. Trust me, by summer you and I will be together, and Harper & Associates will be stronger than ever." Maya closed the laptop slowly, her hands shaking. The beautiful home around her suddenly felt suffocating. Everything she'd sacrificed, every dream she'd deferred, every moment she'd made herself smaller to support Daniel's ambitions. It had all been built on lies. She picked up her phone, scrolling through her contacts. Her finger hovered over one name, Uncle James. Retired federal prosecutor James Mitchell. Her mother's brother, the man who had walked her down the aisle when her own father couldn't. The man who had quietly warned her 10 years ago that Daniel seemed more interested in the Mitchell family connections than in Maya. Herself, Maya had defended Daniel back then, insisted that James was being overprotective. Now, as she stared at the evidence of her husband's betrayal glowing on the laptop screen, she realized her uncle had seen what she'd refused to believe. She pressed the call button. Whatever was about to happen, Maya knew one thing with absolute certainty. The careful life Daniel had built was about to come crashing down, and she was going to be the one holding the sledgehammer. The breaking point, Daniel arrived home at 11:30 that night, reeking of wine and that same cologne. Maya was waiting in the living room, the lights deliberately dim, her laptop open on the coffee table displaying the email thread between him and Vanessa. She'd spent the past 6 hours reading every message, tracking every lie, documenting every betrayal. Her initial shock had crystallized into something harder, colder. "You're still up," Daniel said, loosening his tie as he walked in. He didn't seem surprised to see her, just mildly inconvenienced. "I told you it would be late. How was dinner at Kennard?" Maya asked, her voice eerily calm. Daniel froze mid-step. "What? 3 weeks ago. Tuesday night. You said you were working late on the Seattle project, but you were actually at Kennard. With Vanessa." Maya stood, turning the laptop screen toward him. "Would you like to explain? Or should I just read your emails aloud?" The color drained from Daniel's face, but he recovered quickly. She watched him shift into the mode she'd seen him use with difficult clients. Defensive, then aggressive. "You went through my private emails?" "Maya, that's a violation of—" "Don't!" Her voice cracked like a whip. "Don't you dare make this about privacy. You brought another woman into our marriage, into our life. You've been planning to divorce me like I'm some kind of business problem to solve strategically." Daniel ran his hand through his hair, his jaw clenching. "This isn't how I wanted you to find out." "Oh, how considerate of you." Maya laughed bitterly. "How exactly did you want me to find out, Daniel? Were you going to tell me before or after you moved Vanessa into our home?" "It's not like that," he said, his voice rising. "Maya, you have to understand. We've been disconnected for years. You gave up your career. You stopped being passionate about anything. Vanessa, she gets it. She understands the demands of this profession. She challenges me." "I gave up my career because you asked me to," Maya shouted, years of suppressed frustration erupting. "You said we needed stability. You said one successful career was enough. You said we were building something together. And we did. Look at this house. Look at everything I've provided." Daniel gestured around the room wildly. "You've lived in luxury while I worked 80-hour weeks building that firm from nothing." "You didn't build it from nothing," Maya said coldly. "My Uncle James introduced you to half your major clients. His connections opened doors you couldn't have touched on your own. Or did you forget that part of our history?" Daniel's expression darkened. "I've repaid those favors 10 times over. Whatever debt I owed the Mitchell family is long settled." Before Maya could respond, the front door opened. Both of them turned in shock as Vanessa Reed walked in, using a key Maya hadn't known existed. The younger woman wore a designer dress and heels, her auburn hair swept into an elegant updo. She looked like she belonged in this house, like she'd been planning her place in it for months. "Daniel, you left your phone in my car," Vanessa said, then stopped when she saw Maya. Her surprise seemed genuine, but there was something else in her eyes, a glint of triumph. "Oh, I didn't realize she'd be awake." "You gave her a key?" Maya breathed, the betrayal cutting deeper. "To our home?" Vanessa stepped forward, her chin lifted defiantly. "Maya, I know this is difficult, but Daniel and I are in love. We've been trying to handle this respectfully." "Respectfully?" Maya's voice rose to a pitch she didn't recognize. "You're sleeping with my husband and walking into my home uninvited, and you think that's respectful?" "This isn't helping." Daniel interjected, positioning himself between the two women. Vanessa, you should go. No, Vanessa said firmly. I'm done hiding. I'm done being your secret. Maya deserves the truth, and so do I. She turned to Maya with something almost like pity. He doesn't love you anymore. He hasn't for years. You must have felt it. The words struck like physical blows. Maya had felt it, of course. The distance, the coldness. The way Daniel looked through her rather than at her. But hearing it spoken aloud by the woman who had replaced her was unbearable. Get out, Maya said, her voice trembling. Both of you get out of my sight. Our sight, Daniel corrected, his tone sharp. This is my house, Maya. I built it. I designed every inch of it. And if anyone's leaving, it's you. Maya stared at him, genuinely shocked. You're choosing her. Right now. You're actually choosing her over 8 years of marriage. I'm choosing my future, Daniel said coldly. You've been living in the past for years, Maya. Maybe it's time you moved on. Something inside Maya snapped. She grabbed a decorative vase from the side table, a piece they'd bought together on their honeymoon in Greece, and hurled it at the wall beside Daniel's head. It shattered spectacularly, glass and ceramic exploding across the polished floor. You bastard! She screamed. I gave you everything. Daniel's face contorted with rage. He lunged forward, grabbing Maya's wrists and pushing her backward. She stumbled, her hip catching the edge of the coffee table as she fell. Pain shot through her side as she hit the floor, the laptop clattering beside her. Don't you ever throw things at me, Daniel hissed, standing over her. His face was flushed, his hands still clenched into fists. Vanessa stood frozen in the doorway, her earlier confidence evaporating. Daniel, oh my God! Maya looked up at her husband from the floor, tasting blood where she'd bitten her lip in the fall. In that moment, she saw him clearly for the first time in years. Not the ambitious young architect she'd fallen in love with, not the successful businessman she'd supported, but a weak, cruel man who would destroy anyone who threatened his comfort. With trembling hands, Maya reached for her phone, which had slipped from her pocket. She scrolled to Uncle James's contact, the one she'd called earlier, the one who'd told her to call back immediately if anything happened. Daniel saw what she was doing and laughed harshly. What, you're going to tell your uncle? You think James Mitchell is going to save you? I'm not some kid he can intimidate anymore, Maya. I'm a respected professional with powerful clients. Maya pressed the call button, her eyes never leaving Daniel's face. The phone rang once, then connected. Uncle James, she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. I need you. Daniel just pushed me. I need you right now. Through the phone, she heard a car door slam and an engine start. I'm already on my way. James Mitchell's voice was granite. Stay on the line with me, Maya. And Daniel, if you're listening, don't go anywhere. We have a lot to discuss. Daniel's confident expression finally cracked, replaced by the first flicker of genuine fear. The silent storm James Mitchell arrived within 20 minutes, which meant he'd been driving well above the speed limit from his home in Lake Oswego. Maya heard his Mercedes pull into the driveway, the door slam with controlled force. She was still sitting on the floor, her hip throbbing, while Daniel had retreated to the far side of the room. Vanessa had fled the moment Maya made the phone call, suddenly not so eager to be part of the confrontation. The front door opened without a knock. James Mitchell was 68 years old, silver-haired and impeccably dressed even at midnight in pressed slacks and a crisp button-down shirt. He'd been a federal prosecutor for 30 years before retiring 5 years ago, and he still carried himself with the authority of a man who'd put white-collar criminals behind bars. His eyes swept the room, taking in the shattered vase, the overturned laptop, and Maya on the floor. Get up, he said to Maya, his voice gentle. Then to Daniel, in a tone that could freeze lava, you. Sit down and don't say a word unless I ask you a direct question. Daniel opened his mouth to protest, but something in James's expression made him sink onto the sofa instead. James helped Maya to her feet, examining her face with the careful attention of someone documenting evidence. He took several photos with his phone. The red mark on her wrist where Daniel had grabbed her, the bruise forming on her hip, the split lip. I'm taking you out of here tonight, James said to Maya. Pack whatever you need for a week. You're staying with me and Helen. This is my house, Daniel finally spoke up, his voice lacking its earlier conviction. You can't just... James turned to him slowly. Do you really want to finish that sentence, Daniel? Because I'm trying very hard to be civilized right now, and you assaulting my niece is testing the limits of my self-control. He paused. Here's what's going to happen. Maya is leaving with me tonight. Tomorrow, she's filing for divorce and a restraining order, and you're going to cooperate fully or I promise you'll regret it. You can't threaten me, Daniel said, but his voice wavered. I'm not threatening you. I'm explaining reality. James smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Now I'm going to help Maya pack. When we come back down, you're going to be sitting exactly where you are now. Understood? Daniel nodded mutely, and Maya followed her uncle upstairs. In the bedroom she'd shared with Daniel for 8 years, she broke down completely, sobbing into James's shoulder like she was 12 years old again. I'm so sorry, she whispered. You warned me about him. You tried to tell me? Hush now, James said, stroking her hair. You have nothing to apologize for. He's the one who should be sorry. He pulled back, looking at her seriously. Maya, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Has he hit you before tonight? No, Maya said. He's been cold, dismissive, cruel with words, but never physical. Not until tonight. James nodded, filing that information away. And this affair with his employee, how long has it been going on? At least 6 months, maybe longer. Her name is Vanessa Reed. She works at his firm. Vanessa Reed, James repeated, pulling out his phone and typing notes. Good. Now pack your things. We have work to do. The next morning, while Maya slept late at James and Helen's comfortable home in the hills, James Mitchell sat in his study making phone calls. His first was to Margaret Chen, the best divorce attorney in Portland. His second was to an old colleague from his prosecuting days, now a forensic accountant. His third was to Tom Reynolds, an investigator who specialized in corporate fraud. Tom, it's James Mitchell. I need you to look into someone for me. Daniel Harper, principal architect at Harper & Associates. I want to know everything. Client relationships, business finances, tax returns, building permits, contractor payments. Everything. By the afternoon, James had assembled what he privately called his War Council, a team of professionals who owed him favors from his years as a prosecutor. They met at his house around the dining room table where Maya had eaten countless Sunday dinners as a child. Here's what we know, James began, spreading documents across the table. Daniel Harper has been having an affair with a junior employee. Last night, he physically assaulted my niece when she confronted him. He's made it clear he wants her out of the marriage with minimal fuss. He looked around the table. We're going to make that very difficult for him. Margaret Chen, the divorce attorney, was already reviewing the email evidence Maya had printed. Adultery, assault, and this is interesting. He's been using marital funds for the affair. These hotel charges, the jewelry purchase, that's dissipation of marital assets. We can use that. It gets better, said Tom Reynolds, the investigator. He pulled up his laptop. I made some calls this morning. Harper & Associates has been growing fast, too fast. They went from 3 employees to 15 in 2 years. That kind of expansion requires serious capital. And, James prompted, and I can't find where the capital came from. His business loans are relatively small, no major investors on record, but his personal accounts show regular large deposits that don't match his salary or declared business income. Tom looked up. James, I think he might be cooking the books. James felt a cold satisfaction settle over him. Keep digging. I want to know every financial irregularity, every questionable transaction. Meanwhile, Daniel Harper was having the worst day of his professional life. He'd arrived at the office to find 3 clients had called requesting meetings to discuss the status of their projects. By noon, 2 of them had pulled their contracts, citing concerns about leadership stability at the firm. Daniel suspected James Mitchell had made some calls. Vanessa had been distant all morning, barely making eye contact. When Daniel finally cornered her in the conference room, she crossed her arms defensively. We need to talk about last night, Daniel said. You pushed her down, Vanessa said quietly. Daniel, you told me she was cold and unreasonable. You didn't tell me you'd get violent. She threw something at me. What was I supposed to do? Not that, Vanessa said firmly. Look, I need some time to think. Maybe we moved too fast. Daniel felt panic rising in his chest. Vanessa, don't do this. We have plans. We're building something together. Are we? She looked at him with new skepticism. Because right now it looks like you're about to lose half your business in a divorce. And James Mitchell is calling every major client we have. I heard the Seattle Convention Center project might be in jeopardy. That's just Mitchell flexing his connections. It'll blow over. Will it? Vanessa moved toward the door. I need space, Daniel. Don't call me for a few days. As she left, Daniel sank into a conference room chair, his carefully constructed world beginning to crack around him. He pulled out his phone and called his lawyer, Peter Morrison, whom he'd used for business contracts. Peter, I need your help. My wife's uncle is James Mitchell, the former prosecutor. He's coming after me. There was a long pause on the other end. James Mitchell? Daniel, that man is a legend in legal circles. He doesn't lose. My advice? Give Maya whatever she wants in the divorce and pray he doesn't start digging into your business. What do you mean, digging into my business? I mean, Mitchell spent 30 years finding financial crimes. If there's anything questionable in your company's books, he'll find it. And trust me, he'll be looking. Daniel hung up, his hand shaking. He thought about the creative accounting he'd been doing for the past 2 years. The inflated invoices to clients, the contractor payments that didn't quite add up, the personal expenses run through the business account. It had seemed like smart business at the time, victimless shortcuts that every successful firm took. Now, with James Mitchell's attention focused on him like a laser, those shortcuts suddenly felt like a noose tightening around his neck. That evening, Daniel sat alone in the too-large house he'd designed as a monument to his success. Maya's absence was palpable. No coffee brewing, no soft music playing, no warmth. He poured himself a scotch and pulled up his bank accounts on his laptop. He had assets, certainly. The house, the firm, investments. But much of it was leveraged, tied up in projects and loans. And if Vanessa was pulling away, if clients were leaving, if James Mitchell was truly coming after him. Daniel drained his glass and poured another. For the first time in his adult life, he felt genuinely afraid. He'd always been the one in control, the one making the strategic moves. Now he was playing defense against an opponent who had decades more experience and nothing to lose. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mr. Harper, this is Tom Reynolds. I'm an investigator working on behalf of Maya Harper's legal team. We'd like to ask you some questions about your business finances. Please have your attorney contact Margaret Chen's office to schedule a deposition. Daniel stared at the message, his stomach churning. The silent storm James Mitchell had promised was gathering strength, and Daniel was standing right in its path. The walls collapse. 3 weeks later, Daniel Harper's world was disintegrating in slow motion. Tom Reynolds had been thorough, devastatingly so. The investigator had uncovered a pattern of financial irregularities that stretched back 3 years. Inflated invoices where Daniel charged clients for premium materials, but used cheaper alternatives, pocketing the difference. Subcontractor payments that went to shell companies Daniel controlled. Personal expenses laundered through business accounts. Tax deductions for charitable donations that never actually happened. James Mitchell sat in Margaret Chen's conference room, reviewing the findings with quiet satisfaction. Maya was there too, looking stronger than she had in weeks. The bruises had faded, but something else had changed. She held herself differently now, with the posture of someone who'd stopped apologizing for existing. The IRS will be very interested in this, Margaret said, tapping the financial report. We're talking about potential tax fraud to the tune of $400,000 over 3 years. And the clients he defrauded? James asked. We've identified 7 who were significantly overcharged. The Bellingham Medical Center project alone involved $200,000 in fraudulent billing. Margaret looked up. James, this isn't just a divorce anymore. This is criminal. I know, James said calmly. I've already reached out to my former colleagues at the U.S. Attorney's Office. They're opening an investigation. Maya felt a strange mix of emotions. She'd loved Daniel once, or thought she had. Seeing him exposed as not just unfaithful, but genuinely corrupt, was like watching a statue crumble to reveal it had always been hollow inside. What happens now? She asked. Now we wait, James said. The legal system moves slowly, but it moves. Daniel's lawyer is already trying to negotiate, which tells me he knows how bad this looks. What James didn't mention was the other pressure campaign he'd been running. Every major client Daniel had, most of whom had been introduced through Mitchell family connections, had received a carefully worded phone call. James never threatened, never demanded. He simply asked questions. Are you satisfied with the quality of Harper & Associates' work? Have you had your invoices audited recently? I'd hate for any of my referrals to be taken advantage of. The results were predictable. By the end of the month, Harper & Associates had lost 60% of its active contracts. The Seattle Convention Center project, Daniel's crown jewel, had been awarded to a competing firm after the developer suddenly decided to go in a different direction. Daniel watched his firm implode from his increasingly empty office. Employees were jumping ship, updating their resumes, taking interviews with competitors. His senior architect, Marcus Webb, had been the first to go, taking 3 junior staff with him to start their own firm. Vanessa had been among the defectors. She'd lasted exactly 2 weeks after the night Maya was hurt before accepting a position at a rival architecture firm in Seattle. Her goodbye had been brief and businesslike, delivered via email rather than in person. Dear Daniel, it read, I've accepted a position with Morrison & Associates in Seattle. I think we both know this is for the best. What we had was exciting, but I'm not interested in being part of a sinking ship. I hope you understand. Professional regards, Vanessa. Professional regards. Daniel had laughed bitterly when he read it. The woman who'd proclaimed her love, who'd demanded he leave his wife, had abandoned him the moment his success faltered. He'd thrown away his marriage for someone who'd only wanted him when he was winning. He'd tried calling Maya several times, leaving voicemails that started apologetic and grew increasingly desperate. Maya, please, we need to talk. I made mistakes, but we can work this out. We built this life together. Don't let your uncle destroy everything. Maya never called back. Instead, her lawyer sent a formal response. Cease all direct contact with Ms. Harper. Any communication should go through legal counsel. Violation of this request will result in enforcement of the restraining order. The restraining order. That had been humiliating. Standing before a judge while Margaret Chen presented photos of Maya's injuries. The threatening texts Daniel had sent when he'd been drinking. The pattern of controlling behavior Maya described in her affidavit. The judge had granted it without hesitation. Now Daniel sat in his house, which the court had ordered him to vacate within 30 days, sorting through the wreckage of his life. The doorbell rang and he opened it to find 2 federal agents displaying badges. Daniel Harper? I'm Special Agent Melissa Torres with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. We have a warrant to search these premises and seize financial documents related to Harper & Associates. Daniel's lawyer had warned him this was coming, but the reality was still shocking. He watched helplessly as agents methodically photographed every room, boxed up files from his home office, and copied the contents of his personal computer. The search took 4 hours. When they finally left, Daniel poured himself a drink with shaking hands. His phone rang. Peter Morrison, his attorney. Daniel, we need to talk about your options. The prosecution is willing to discuss a plea agreement. A plea? I haven't even been charged yet. You will be. The evidence is overwhelming. If you cooperate now, acknowledge wrongdoing, and agree to make restitution to the defrauded clients, they might recommend reduced sentencing. Sentencing. Peter, what are we talking about here? There was a heavy sigh on the other end. Tax fraud, wire fraud, possibly money laundering. Without a plea deal, you're looking at 5 to 7 years federal prison. With a deal, maybe 18 months and supervised release. The phone nearly slipped from Daniel's hand. Prison. Actual prison. For accounting tricks that every contractor he knew employed to some degree. Except he'd been arrogant about it, sloppy, and now he had James Mitchell's full attention focused on destroying him. There's more, Peter continued. The state licensing board has opened an investigation. Even if you avoid prison, you'll likely lose your architectural license. And the civil suits are starting. Bellingham Medical Center filed this morning, seeking $200,000 in damages plus legal fees. Daniel hung up without responding and walked through his showcase home one last time. Every custom detail he'd designed, every expensive finish he'd selected, it had all been about proving something. Proving he'd made it. Proving he was better than the scholarship kid from Tacoma who'd married into Portland's old money. Proving he didn't need Maya or her family connections. He'd proven something, all right. He'd proven that his success had been built on lies, that his confidence had been arrogance, and that the woman he'd betrayed had been the only person who'd ever truly loved him. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Against his better judgment, he opened it. It was a photo. Maya standing in front of a new office space, a sign being installed that read, Maya Mitchell Design Studio. She was smiling, genuinely smiling, in a way he hadn't seen in years. The message below read, Thought you'd want to know, I'm restarting my career. Thank you for finally setting me free. And Daniel stared at the photo for a long moment, then hurled his phone across the room where it shattered against the wall he'd so carefully designed. Maya was moving forward, reclaiming her maiden name, building something of her own. Meanwhile, he was drowning in legal fees, facing federal charges, and watching everything he'd built crumble into dust. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd told Maya she was holding him back, that she didn't understand his ambitions, that Vanessa was his future. Now Vanessa was gone. His ambitions were exposed as fraudulent, and his future involved plea bargains and prison sentences. Daniel sank onto the designer sofa in his nearly empty house and finally let himself cry. Not tears of remorse for hurting Maya, though he should have felt that. These were tears of self-pity, of a man who'd gambled everything on his own cleverness and lost catastrophically. Outside, James Mitchell sat in his Mercedes across the street, watching the lights in Daniel's house. He'd promised Maya he would handle this, and he had. But he'd also learned something important over his decades as a prosecutor. The worst punishment for men like Daniel Harper wasn't prison. It was watching the people they'd hurt thrive without them. James started his engine and drove away, leaving Daniel to his hollow victories and empty house. Justice, he'd learned, wasn't always swift. But when it finally arrived, it was thorough. The final blueprint. 6 months later, the courtroom was surprisingly quiet as Daniel Harper stood before Judge Patricia Williams for sentencing. He'd taken the plea deal, 18 months in federal prison for tax fraud and wire fraud, followed by 3 years supervised release. His architectural license had been permanently revoked by the state board. Harper and Associates had been dissolved, its remaining assets liquidated to pay restitution to the clients he'd defrauded. Daniel had aged visibly. His expensive suits no longer fit quite right. His confident posture had collapsed into something hunched and defeated. Peter Morrison stood beside him, having delivered the bad news with professional detachment. Even with the plea deal, Daniel was ruined. The civil lawsuits alone would bankrupt him. The house was gone, sold to cover debts. His reputation was destroyed beyond repair. Mr. Harper, Judge Williams said, her voice stern, you violated the trust of your clients, your employees, and most egregiously your wife. You built an empire on fraud and arrogance, and when confronted with your failures, you responded with violence. The court finds your actions reprehensible. She sentenced him to the agreed-upon 18 months, to begin in 2 weeks. Daniel nodded numbly, barely processing the words. As the marshals led him from the courtroom, he caught sight of someone in the gallery, Maya, sitting beside James Mitchell. She wasn't smiling or gloating. She simply watched him with the calm expression of someone who'd already moved on. Maya had indeed moved on. Her interior design studio had taken off faster than she'd imagined possible. Her first major client had been the Bellingham Medical Center, the same one Daniel had defrauded. Word spread quickly about her talent, her integrity, and her eye for detail. Within 4 months, she'd hired 2 junior designers and was turning down projects because her schedule was full. She'd also started dating again. Nothing serious yet. But she was rediscovering what it felt like to be valued, to be seen as a whole person rather than an accessory to someone else's ambition. The trauma of Daniel's betrayal and violence had left scars. But therapy and her uncle's unwavering support had helped her heal. As they left the courthouse that day, James put his arm around Maya's shoulders. How do you feel? He asked gently. Maya thought about it. Sad, she admitted. Not for him, exactly. More for the time I lost, the person I let myself become. She looked up at her uncle, but also grateful. If he hadn't destroyed everything, I might have stayed forever, shrinking myself to fit his vision of what I should be. You're thriving now, James said with pride. That's the best revenge. Living well, Daniel Harper reported to federal prison 2 weeks later. The minimum security facility was nothing like the dramatic prisons on television, but the loss of freedom was devastating nonetheless. He shared a dormitory with white-collar criminals like himself, men who'd believed they were too smart, too successful, too important to face consequences. Vanessa Reed, his former mistress, had moved to Seattle and engaged to a senior partner at her new firm. She'd blocked Daniel's number and never looked back. The excitement she'd felt in their affair had evaporated the moment real consequences appeared. She'd wanted the glamorous life Daniel represented, not the man himself. During his incarceration, Daniel had plenty of time to think about the choices that had led him here. He thought about Maya's patience, her sacrifices, her quiet strength that he'd mistaken for weakness. He thought about how James Mitchell's connections, the same connections Daniel had once used to build his career, had been the instrument of his downfall. Mostly, he thought about the moment he'd raised his hand to Maya, the moment that had set everything in motion. He wrote her letters from prison, attempting apologies that never quite captured the magnitude of his betrayal. Maya never wrote back. Her lawyer returned the letters unopened with a simple note. Ms. Mitchell has moved forward with her life and requests no further contact. Ms. Mitchell. She'd reclaimed her maiden name completely, severing the last legal tie between them. 18 months later, Daniel was released to a halfway house in Portland. He was 44 years old, broke, professionally blacklisted, and utterly alone. He found work as a construction site supervisor, ironic, given that he'd once designed the buildings others built. The pay was a fraction of what he'd once earned. But with his record, he was lucky to have any job at all. One rainy afternoon, Daniel was walking through downtown when he saw it, a storefront with elegant lettering, Maya Mitchell Design Studio. Through the large windows, he could see a bustling office. Maya was there, animated and smiling, presenting design boards to a young couple who hung on her every word. She wore a simple dress and had cut her hair shorter. She looked radiant, confident, nothing like the quiet woman he'd taken for granted. Daniel stood in the rain, watching the life that could have been his if he'd just appreciated what he had. If he'd been faithful, honest, kind, if he'd built his success on integrity instead of fraud, if he'd valued Maya as a partner instead of treating her as an obstacle. Maya glanced toward the window, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. There was no recognition in her gaze, no acknowledgement. She simply looked through him as if he were a stranger, then turned back to her clients with a warm smile. Daniel walked away, the rain mixing with tears he was too proud to acknowledge. He'd built his life like one of his architectural projects, impressive on the outside, but with faulty foundations that couldn't support the weight of his ambitions. And when the structure finally collapsed, he'd lost everything. Maya, meanwhile, had rebuilt herself from the ground up, with solid foundations of self-worth and integrity. She'd learned that sometimes the cruelest thing someone can do is also the kindest. Daniel's betrayal had freed her to become who she was always meant to be. That evening, Maya locked up her studio and drove to James and Helen's house for their weekly dinner. As she sat around the table with family who truly loved her, sharing stories and laughter, she felt a profound sense of gratitude, not for the pain she'd endured, but for the strength she'd discovered in surviving it. Daniel Harper had tried to break her. Instead, he'd broken himself against her resilience. And in the end, that was the only blueprint that mattered, not the buildings he'd designed or the empire he'd built on lies, but the simple truth that karma always completes its architecture. Sometimes it takes time. Sometimes the collapse is slow and devastating. But eventually, what you build through betrayal and cruelty will always crumble, while what you build through integrity and love will stand forever. Maya Mitchell had built something that would last. Daniel Harper had built a monument to his own destruction. The story was complete, and justice had drawn its final lines. The end.